Good morning, everybody. This is Hugh Taylor, Vice President of Marketing at SOA Software. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for the presentation in our SOA University series, Service-Oriented Architecture and the Revolution in Business Process Management. Just want to give you a couple of quick housekeeping details before we get started. I expect the presentation to last around 30 or 40 minutes, and I invite you to ask me questions during the presentation. We don't have a lot of people online right now, so if we can take the conversation in a direction that's interesting to you, please don't hesitate to ask me a question in the Q&A chat box. If you're having trouble hearing me, you can go ahead and send me a question or send me a message in the chat box, either way. We're going to make the slides for this presentation available after we're finished, so if you're interested in getting them, please send me an email to info@soa.com, and I'd be happy to send them to you. We're recording the session this morning, and we expect to have the recording available in the next couple of days through SOA.com. So I'm going to go to full screen mode now. So you should see the head slide for our presentation on your screen now. I'm going to give a really quick overview of SOA Software. We're a software company based in Los Angeles, California. We provide a product suite for management and security of service-oriented architecture and web services. We work primarily with Fortune 500 companies such as Verizon and Merrill Lynch and JetBlue and others. We're partnered with IBM, IBM Software Group, BEA, Oracle, and CA. Our product set primarily involves a SOAP intermediary that helps provide service-level agreements and quality of service and security for web services. And I'll come back to this later, but just so you have a basic idea of who we are. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm VP of Marketing here at SOA Software. I'm not an engineer or a software developer. I come more from an MBA, business management, business analyst type of background. I've worked in several industries, including enterprise software and website development, and also the printing industry and the entertainment industry. And though my colleagues like to tease me that I can't hold down a job, the reason I mention this is that I've been around a lot of business situations, and I've seen in many situations that businesses sometimes operate differently in reality than they claim to on paper. I'm the author of 3 books, including Understanding Enterprise SOA, which I wrote with Eric Pullier, our chairman, and the upcoming book, The Joy of SOX, why service-oriented architecture and Sarbanes-Oxley might be the best thing that ever happened to you, which is coming out from Wiley in April. So today's subject is the revolution in business process management that comes from service-oriented architecture. And it makes sense to start with a basic definition. What is business process management? It's one of these terms that a lot of people use, but not everybody really understands, or worse, perhaps people use it thinking they understand it, and maybe they don't. BitPipe has a good definition, which is of business process management, which is the ability to have end-to-end visibility and control over all parts of a long-lived multi-step information request or transaction that spans multiple applications and people in one or more companies. And continues to say that means that a business process will harness and enhance the value of business processes, however large or small, wherever they reside within the extended enterprise and whomever they involve. So it's a business process management is a set of practices that involve different kinds of people and technologies that give you visibility over business transactions and connect them to underlying IT assets that are involved, although not every aspect of a business process is technological. It might be manual as well. So to use a simple example, we're going to look at the gas pump credit card authorization, and 2 really quick disclaimers on this. One is I'm going to use flowcharting language to represent business processes. I realize that there is a very specialized business process iconography that we can use, but just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to use flowcharting language. And also, this example is extremely simplified, and if there's someone on the line who has deep experience in the petroleum industry, they might tell me that I'm wrong, but we're using this for illustrative purposes only. So I'm assuming that we've all had the experience, at least we all do in LA, of filling up our cars at the gas pump and having to type in our credit card numbers, type in our zip code upon being prompted at the gas pump in order for the transaction to be authorized. And so it's kind of like you swipe your card, you type in your zip code, some big computer somewhere in the United States checks your zip code against the one they have on file, and if it matches, they turn on the gas. And what you see at the bottom of the screen is the way this process goes. And basically, it's an authorization and authentication process where either the credit card company has to match your zip code with the one they have on file, or the bank has to match your PIN number to the one they have on file and send back a message to the gas pump saying, give this guy gas or don't give this guy gas. And the reason I show this is an example of how a company might map out a business process in order to explain what they need from the software developers and architects who are involved in supporting the transaction. And just to continue with this, it's worth noting that there are three entities involved in this process. It's not a one company situation. There's a gas retailer, there's a credit card company, and there's a bank, and they all have to work together. And there's other participants as well. There are people who are in the business of authorizing credit card transactions. There are internet service providers or network providers. There are companies that manufacture credit card terminals and gas pumps, and also companies that create software for those kind of hardware products. So who cares? Why does this matter? The reason that you have business process management is that it can give managers control over what they're doing in their operations. Because as we see with large and complex organizations, that what one person thinks should be done in a business process may not automatically be what someone else thinks should be done. So business process management or business process modeling is a technique that business managers can use to explain in visual terms and in an understandable step-by-step process what should be happening. And if it's done right, it can give managers some agility over what they're doing, because by having a well-defined business process that they can communicate to IT to say, this is what we need the application and the architecture to do for us, we have to map to this process, it then becomes, at least theoretically, simpler to change that process because everybody's working off of a common script. And it reduces the subjectivity in mapping business needs to IT requirements. And this is, in our experience at SOA Software, we see a lot of anxiety and aggravation with this type of issue in large companies, that the business management has a set of requirements that they may have trouble communicating to IT, and IT may have trouble understanding what the business management wants. And so business process management and its related processes helps to reduce the subjectivity in that. Now, from an IT perspective, BPM is like a common language for understanding the application and infrastructure requirements for a line of business, which is essentially the IT organization's customer. And essentially it's a tool that business analysts can use to listen to line of business managers and then translate and explain application requirements to developers and architects. So it's a sort of lingua franca of business and IT. Now, what's going on with BPM at a lot of companies? Depends who you ask, of course, but in our observation, not a whole lot. And there's some reasons why. In some companies, it's done very effectively. In other companies, it's paid lip service. In other companies, they're simply not doing it. And let's look at why there are challenges to business process management in the real world. So if we look at this slide, we can see that each of the process steps maps to a specific IT asset or IT system. So for the sake of argument, we're going to say that the gas retailer gas pump is a .NET application. The credit card company is using a Java application on a J2E app server. The bank is a Kix application on a mainframe. And it's all connected by proprietary interfaces. and multiple transport protocols. So that is a problematic situation. Excuse me one second, my slide isn't moving. Just want to move. Okay, so in a way, you've got a situation where you want to do BPM, but it's just too complicated. You have tightly coupled applications, and changing the connections between them requires a lot of time and attention. You get effectively islands of integration. Legacy integration is tightly locked in, and change management can be slow. So although you may want to, it's actually quite difficult to map IT resources to business processes in a BPM situation. It's just too difficult to actually put into effect. Or if you put it into effect, when you want to change that process map, that process steps, you're going to have trouble. So where you see some success in BPM is in sort of static processes. And most processes are not static, as we know, but there are certain things that are extremely predictable. For example, like mortgage application approvals are fairly standard in the process, and so that's the kind of process that can be mapped to underlying IT assets, and there isn't a lot of change that occurs. In other business situations, they're much more dynamic. And so we end up with a situation that can occur, and we've seen this happen, and I do not want you to take me the wrong way. I'm not pointing a finger at IT, because I think that these problems are often as much or more on the side of the business management organization, but the perception is that IT cannot keep up with business process changes. So you have a situation like the one we show in this little chart where you have a business process change that initiates an IT initiative, which then may take much longer to complete than the business process change needs, and by the time it's done, you might be on to the next business process change, and then IT can't keep up. And just to reiterate, that's not to blame IT. Very often it's not their fault, but they're often blamed. So, but it's a situation that's very aggravating, and we've probably all been involved in that. So what can be done about this? So when you get to service-oriented architecture, which I'm sort of assuming that everybody here is pretty familiar with it, but I'm going to give a quick explanation. Service-oriented architecture involves a set of technologies, primarily web services, to expose applications or create software applications that can be invoked on demand from any place in the world, from any piece of software in the world using web services or SOA standards. You end up with a situation where the ability to match a business process step to a particular IT asset becomes a lot simpler, because the consuming application is able to switch over and consume another web service without the kind of challenge or problems that you get in a conventional tightly coupled situation. Now, obviously, this is greatly simplified, but it's important to get at this from a basic level and understand how it works. So you have in the slide a hypothetical four-step process, A, B, C, D. Each process step involves the consumption and invocation of a particular web service, and then those web services can be found in the SOA environment, which I've posited to be a sort of unified enterprise service bus. So the result is that if you switch if the web service that you need for process step A was previously on web service number 10, but then all of a sudden it's on web service number 14 on a different machine, it's really not that big a deal to make that change. Certainly, it's a lot simpler than you would have in a traditional tightly coupled environment, because you've eliminated the complexity of the message layer, and you have reduced the importance of the network. You have a network transparency, and you're able to move the requests around. Now, obviously, it's not quite that simple, but in terms of contrast, you're a lot more open and flexible in a SOA environment for doing BPM. So if we go back to our definition of BPM, and we define it as the ability to have end-to-end visibility and control over all parts of a long-lived multi-step information request or transaction that spans multiple applications and people in one or more companies. Let's look at end-to-end visibility and control. With loose coupling in an SOA and simplified integration, it is easier to maintain end-to-end visibility and control. Multi-step information requests or transactions spanning multiple applications. If you use standards to connect applications, you can have control and visibility over multi-step information requests or transactions. It is easier to do with an SOA because the pieces of the transaction can be invoked more easily. Now we seem to have a question coming, so hold on one second, please. Okay. The question was, can we have the presentation slides? And the answer is yes. I'll be making them available at the end of, after the presentation is over, and I will send them to anybody who requests them. So, and now just the third point, in one or more companies, as we said, business processes span different companies sometimes. So the standards enable you to put partners onto your platform without requiring them to buy proprietary middleware. And as we've seen a lot, as we can see sometimes in the corporate environment, business process management and business process modeling often fall apart in multi-company situations because you just don't have a good governance setup or good communication. And now I just want to digress for just a teeny, tiny reality check, because we're all very excited now. We're going to rush out and do SOA. But before we get too excited, I just want to say that there's more to it than that, and I want to address those issues. In fact, I even considered calling this presentation a, quote, revolution in BPM or a revolution in BPM, sort of tongue-in-cheek. Okay. Question comes in. Can you describe how loose coupling contributes to end-to-end visibility? Okay, that's a good question. Just to go back a few slides, the end-to-end visibility means that you can monitor the functioning of a business process as it is taking place. Now, it's the same sort of thing as before, where it is possible to set that up in a tightly configured, tightly coupled environment. But what happens there is that it's when you're tightly coupled, it's much easier to break if you start changing it. So if you have a business process that maps to a set of web services, you can set up monitoring of those web services. And if you start to change around the configuration of the web services or the order of the process steps or adding process steps, then you can switch around the monitoring of those web services more easily than you can in a tightly coupled environment. Let me know if that's a satisfactory answer to the question. We can return to that issue later. But on the, one second, please. Okay. Person who asked that question said, thank you, so you're welcome. Okay. Let's go on with some issues. Okay, here's some issues. Line of business managers still may not want to or know how to do BPM. That's one of the assumptions that comes up in a lot of BPM discussions is, now we've got this great tool, everything's going to be great. Well, not necessarily. Business managers may not really know what it is or understand how to use it. SOA does not make turf or politics go away magically. That's another thing that's very amusing in some of the discussions I hear, articles I read, that somehow, now that we have SOA, we're going to do BPM because, it's all possible. But, as there are many things in business that are possible that don't get done because it violates someone's idea of what their turf is or the politics situation are such that they can't get into it. And In some cases, we're assuming that line of business managers understand the process well enough to model it, or they can agree on what the process actually is. And if they do agree, we're then conversely assuming that the IT organization will be responsive to a desire to use SOA as a way to make BPM a reality. So there's a lot of real organizational challenges. And on a technical level, can an application development and a software development lifecycle keep up with business process changes? That's, we live in a project-based, budget-constrained universe. So there are times probably when, even though it's entirely possible technologically, the architecture may not keep up with the business process. And my feeling for this is that if you start breaking the connection between the business process and the underlying assets and you're patching it together without a formalized review or a established process, the whole thing will fall apart. And then just finally, on a technical note, there, even though you have SOA, there are certain last-mile security and compliance problems and other disconnects that impair the agility of mapping IT to business processes. And I'll give you an example. This is just another example of sort of a really basic business that lets its customers buy product through a customer portal. And we see in the bottom of the slide, you have the corporation, which has general ledger on a J2E application, and then it has a warehouse system, which is a COBOL mainframe application, and then a .NET customer portal, and they're all connected by proprietary interface. And the whole system works great at a basic level, although it's hard to change. But if you look at the business process on the top, it's a two-company dance where the customer places an order, the company receives the order, they check the credit. If the credit's okay, they write up the order. They check if it's in stock. If it's in stock, they ship it. And I've tried to color code the beige squares match the beige circle for the warehouse systems. The violet-colored squares match the violet-colored customer portal application, and the pink squares match the pink corporate general ledger system. So you have three sets of systems involved in this business process. And so this is a situation that works, but it's hard to change. So let's say then that the company makes a move towards SOA, and you then have a situation that looks like this. You have the corporate system exposed as a web service and consuming web services. You have the warehouse system exposed as a web service and consuming web services. And the customer portal is now a web service hub of some kind that provides direct connections, B2B, to the ERP systems of each respective customer. And this is, as you might have seen, this is where a lot of large companies are going. They want to build in these direct connections to their customers. And it's a great idea. Now, you get potentially, as we've discussed, more dynamic mapping of IT to business process steps in the system, and because we're on SOA, it's easier to keep things synchronized and simpler to change. Okay. Now, however, let's look at the following. There are some problems still. There are interdependencies between separate web services that can cause work for developers who are trying to change an application that maps to a business process. And what I mean is that just because you're on an SOA, you are still going to have developers spending a lot of time looking for web services and making sure that the web services that they're consuming in the application are correct. If you start changing versions of web services in one of these three areas, in a poorly governed or poorly set up SOA, you're going to have a lot of work on your hands keeping track of what's what. And it almost might be more complicated than in a traditional setup, because in an SOA, there are sometimes fewer boundaries between development and production systems, that everything is so interconnected that you may not have the ability to have the same kind of rigor in your software development lifecycle. On the customer side, you are creating a potential security and compliance problem by allowing programmatic access to different firms. If you're allowing them direct access to your enterprise systems, if you have not done the work of securing that or managing that correctly. For example, you might have an issue over non-repudiation where a customer makes an order which you then bill that customer for, but then the customer says, I never placed the order. Now you have to take into account, you have to have the ability to have non-repudiation. And the critical issue here is that SOA and web services are a machine-to-machine technology. You're dealing with one application talking to another, not a person accessing an application. So and now this is the commercial, you'll forgive me, but the reason what we do at SOA Software with our web service management and security product suite is we give you the ability to secure and monitor connections with customers where you can match the identity of an individual user, human user, to the machine that is invoking a web service. And you can also, with our dynamic binding, you can manage the interdependencies between web services inside the corporation that map to business process steps. So we have a solution for delivering on the value of business process management in the service-oriented architecture. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions. I hope you'll feel free to ask me questions. One question that someone has here is there a connection between BPM and federated identity? And that's an interesting question. InfoWorld had an article this week on the realities of federated identity, and it's sort of like a close cousin thematically to business process management, in that many of the challenges in federated identity management are organizational, not technological. But there are numerous challenges that come up in a federated identity scenario in terms of liability and compliance and permissions to let other company users into your systems that are similar to what happens in BPM. And I think that you probably cannot have good BPM between multiple companies if you have not solved some of the federated identity management issues. And just to one more point on that, the SOA Software Service Manager product suite enables you to do federated identity with products such as LDAP and Tivoli and Integrity and others in your SOA. The next question is, what about multi-company processes? This kind of is more on the same idea. As we've said, a lot of business processes map to more than one company, and once again, it's a two-level discussion because you have not only the technological issue, you have to get both companies to agree if you're going to use SOA to do it, and that's usually a pretty smart step and doesn't require, that's a pretty natural step to take, and we've seen that with a lot of our clients. Multiple companies that deal with each other, they go onto an SOA footing, and then all of a sudden they've simplified their interoperation quite a bit. Then you get into organizational political issues, and I think that you have to just understand up front that you need to deal as seriously with those as you do with your technical issues. So anyway, that's all the questions we have. I want to thank you very much for joining us. Please visit us online at www.soa.com, where you can watch previously recorded webcasts on demand. You can also take our great new SOA infrastructure self-assessment quiz and receive your organizational score on that. And I hope you'll join us again. We have more exciting SOA University webinars coming up in the future. In the next month or two, we've got the ROI of mainframe web services coming up. We've got Sarbanes-Oxley compliance in the age of SOA, and a best practices for SOA on BEA Aqualogic. You can reach me, hugh.taylor@soa.com or info@soa.com. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We hope to see you again on SOA University.